One of the hottest topics in Hawaii is definitely education. It comes up every election and certainly every legislative session, and it's important to every parent in the state of Hawaii, and of course every student and teacher as well. So today I have one of the top experts here to help us understand what's going on in our world of education, Senator Jill Tokuda, who is the chair of education in the state Senate. Thank you for joining us.
I don't know about expert, but definitely a big advocate.
Well, you spend a lot of time on education.
Yes, absolutely.
So tell me about yourself. How did you get involved in the state Senate, and where, were you from Hawaii? What's your background?
Born and raised right here in Hawaii. Went to public schools all my life, Kaneohe Elementary School, King Intermediate, Castle High School, and went away for college for a little bit in Washington, D.C., but knew my heart was always back at home. Wanted to give back to the people that gave me so much. So I did come back and go into my professional career working with nonprofit organizations, going into recycling at some point, which I still do. But my heart always was in public service. And actually, I got my start in the Senate when I served as a non-voting student member on the Senate Education Committee back in 1994.
Wow. So
as a senior at Castle.
So you're always passionate about education, huh?
I always knew that was where I could make a difference, especially my exposure at a young age to the legislative process. I saw the power and the possibility that people could have if they all believed in the same thing and wanted the best. By working hard together, you could really get there, and that inspired me. And so I'm glad that I could now come full circle and actually chair the Senate Education Committee. So it's been a very humbling and at times tiring, opportunity for me this past year.
So how many years have you been in the state Senate so far?
I was first elected in 2006, so this is my second term now.
So you are known pretty much as an education chair who listens to everyone, and you run, your meetings. I mean, you run your meetings well. There's different people who have different styles,
sure.
And in the House and Senate as chairs. But I think you've stood out as one of the senators who start on time and let people have their say and all that. But there's been some hot topics that have come up, and very passionate on all sides. And so tell me about some of the issues that you're dealing with as Senate Chair that might have come up this year. I mean, I know there's charter schools, there's the union, threats right now against the state. So what would you like to start with?
Well, I think first of all, one thing that we've learned from very early on is that the issues that we're dealing with education are ongoing. Whether we're in session or out of session, the work is never really done. And so a lot of the issues that we've started during this past legislative session, talking about charter school accountability and governance, looking at minimal days and hours for instructional time for our students, talking about things like teacher evaluations, and teacher training, all these types of issues, early childhood education, bus contracts. While we might have started the discussion back in January and worked our way through the process, even now when we're off session, we're still really taking a good look at those issues, and no doubt will be back up on the agenda when we gavel in January for the next legislative session. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I think the great part is the interim time right now provides us with an opportunity to sit down with no deadlines really looming behind our backs, and have all stakeholders come together and figure out, okay, what is it that we need to do? What are the challenges that we're facing, and how are we going to get across those challenges and prepare essentially for the next legislative session?
Now we have some new stakeholders, actually a lot of new stakeholders in the mix here. We've got a new governor, Governor Abercrombie. We have, he just appointed the new school board because it changed from voting in people we never could remember their names to actually getting appointed. And it looks like some good people on this Board of Education. And of course it's headed by Don Horner, who is the head of First Hawaiian, right? And so then you have a new diverse mix on the board. You have some new lawmakers in there too. And you have a new superintendent, relatively new, right? So how is that all working? Do you see from the outside, or not really actually on the outside, but on the inside, how do you see that working?
I definitely think that all of these changes presents us with some real opportunities to perhaps go even farther than we have in the past. There's nothing wrong with having that institutional knowledge there, but at the same time, I think having a breath of fresh air in these various institutions allows us to think a little bit more outside of the box. And I've been very impressed. One of the biggest highlights of our past legislative session was the appointed board process, actually putting the processes into place and then appointing the inaugural 9, as we call them, to actually serve. And they've been doing an outstanding job, especially given the kind of circumstances that they've been thrown into right off the bat. but definitely provided us with an opportunity to take a look at things differently. I think while we are facing yet another year of challenging fiscal times, as we can, as we've seen in past years, it's also an opportunity for us to look at the way we do things. Can we do things differently, but make things better at the same time? And education is just one of those arenas that are ripe with opportunity for us to really look at. Yes, we may have done this and had this form and function for the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years, but does that still make sense given our current situation and the current times as they are? And I think with these new players in place, we really are looking at things differently. And I think that's why you see a lot of the changes that have been going on happening at a much quicker rate. And the possibility for even more changes really seems much more evident than in the past.
Now we see, there's a big debate over, is there enough money in the school system? And I know, the school system always wants more money. Mm-hmm. And we've seen some schools close, really sad stories in the last few years about Queen Liliuokalani School and mm-hmm. in New Valley, there was a school. And so we see, and it's also a shift in population. I'm sure that's part of it too. Mm-hmm. But, is there enough money? I mean, you hear on one side, conservatives will say you have however much per student, if you count in capital, it's 13,000 or something like that per student. But then on the other side, it's like, well, no, it's not enough money. Is there enough money, and is it going to the right places? Oh, I don't want to put you on the spot.
That's a tough question to
answer
in half an hour.
I know.
For that particular, issue. Yeah. I guess we can always do better. Mm-hmm. I'll say that no matter how we're applying our money to a specific area, whether it be education or healthcare or social services or transportation or the environment, there's always a way that we can look at it and do more with the money and the resources that we have. So mm-hmm. I will say that no matter how we're doing, we always need to look to improve. Yeah. There's no such thing as perfection to me. So in that vein, yes, we do need to take a look at how we're spending our money. Mm-hmm. What we've tried to do this past legislative session is when we put significant amounts of money into a particular area within the Department of Education, are we making sure that we're accountable for those funds? Are we really getting what we're investing in come back to us, whether it's in the area of special needs students going to private schools and really kind of reining in that area to ensure accountability for those private school placements, whether it's like I talked about earlier, the issue of bus cost transportation going up. Mm-hmm. Now we do need to look at the issue of providing transportation services, especially in those hard to fill areas, those rural communities where transportation is a difficult issue. We do need to provide that service. But again, with those inflating costs, we need to try to see how can we rein that in. Many different areas. We do need to take a look at doing things more efficiently. But at the same time, I will say that especially when much of the cost is personnel and making sure that our students have one-on-one time with highly effective teachers, it does cost money. But again, like I said, it should be our goal every day to just see how can we be more efficient, how can we improve on what we're doing.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, I know a lot of people will be happy with that answer. Let's talk about charter schools for a minute. That is like a really interesting dynamic because we talk about money, you talk about funding, where the charter schools will say, we only get however much, half or whatever it is compared to per student compared to the public schools. Can you explain that a little bit, and how did that happen, and are there enough charter schools? What do you think about that?
Well, charter schools is a very complex issue, and I will say this, that charters are a very important part of our educational system. And across the country, you do see the growth in charter schools and the movement itself. At the same time, which is why we do have this task force as well, while financial issues and resources have been one of the things that have been very top of mind for people when they think of charter schools, another issue that's been rising to the surface across the country is accountability, to make sure that, yes, these are public funds, public dollars, public school students. In these charter schools, are we making sure that we're holding these schools accountable for various things like student achievement, for how these funds are being spent, their overall operation? And that's what this charter school task force that we've created through SB 1174 is really seeking to do. It's recognizing that we've got amazing charter schools out there that are doing some very good things, some very innovative ways of teaching and reaching out to our students. At the same time, recognizing that, again, we can do better, we need to do better. After being in existence for over a decade here in Hawaii, it's time for us to step back a little bit and just make sure that as we put funds, and potentially even more funds, into our charter school system and see even potentially more schools come into being in terms of charter schools, we need to make sure that those clear lines of accountability and authority, a good governance structure is in place. And that's really what this charter school task force is all about. And I can tell you it's gained national attention. We have the involvement of the National Governors Association, the National Association of Charter School Authorizers, Education Commission of the States is even weighing in on this. They're all kind of tuning into what Hawaii is doing because I think they view this as an opportunity to not only increase the playing field for charter schools, but really put together maybe a really solid model for how we can do things right. So there's a lot of things that's going on with charter schools this interim.
So is there still an issue? I remember at one time there was a cap on charter schools starting up. Is that still an issue? And do they still have less funding than public schools? And how is that going?
It depends who you ask.
Okay. Because I know I've heard that going back and forth where they were going to get more money, and I'm not sure if they do.
You know, the funding issue is always a tricky one. I mean, just as it is when you have any other public school and they're dealing with their weighted student formula and the various variations between their school's makeup, right? And how much money they get per student versus a school across the street. With charter schools, it is still also a very difficult calculation. Do we need to take a better look at the funding formula, how the money comes down, all of these various aspects? I think we need to constantly keep that in mind. We had a task force actually looking at that whole issue of just funding last summer that dealt with looking at per pupil funding as well as facilities funding, which is another hot topic you always hear about charter schools that potentially will close shop because they no longer have a facility in which to operate from. So those are still, unfortunately, ongoing issues that we do need to continually address in terms of what is adequate and equitable funding for charter schools, which is the real big conflict, I would say, right now that does exist. And how do we address that going forward? I mean, it's not an easy answer.
What are some of the success stories, I guess, for charter schools that can you think of any off the top of your head of some really outstanding charter schools? I don't want to put you on the spot. Everybody's going to say, how come you didn't say anything about me? But
there's quite a few, and I don't want to be found guilty of missing someone if I don't mention a name. But I think if you take a look at what our charters are doing, whether it be in the area of a Native Hawaiian culture and language and some of the immersion charter schools that we have, there's some amazing success stories there. If you take a look at science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM disciplines, distance learning, you can definitely see a lot of ground being made by our charter schools. And really that was the whole essence of the charter school revolution, was being able to take a school that could be innovative, that would have the flexibility it needed to look at different ways of teaching, to address different ways of learning. And I think what we need to do better is to really capitalize on those success stories and try to multiply those. If it works well in one charter, why can't we then take a look at those curriculums, those models, those teaching methods, and apply them to other public schools that can benefit as well? And I don't think we've really made that connection or that jump just yet, but that is an important factor that we do need to take a look at.
Now, recently you had an expert come in from Berkeley. Was it Berkeley, California, or
Dr. Laura Go?
Right, and she came to do a joint House and Senate briefing, right? So how did that go, and what do you think lawmakers took away from that?
It was a good discussion, and I will note 122-page PowerPoint presentation, but luckily she went through the first 35 pages only, so the rest was just required reading.
I was going to say, you need a lot of coffee.
We always have a lot of homework in the Education Committee, so it's very appropriate that we had a reading list to follow. But it was a good discussion. It was an opportunity for us to take a look at what are other states and jurisdictions doing across the country in the realm of teacher evaluation and as it relates to educational reform. Because I think no matter what state, what jurisdiction you're in, we all want the same thing. We want to do right by our kids. We want to give them the best environment, all the tools that they need, all the support that they need so that they can succeed. And this is just one way that we can take a look at how do we best help those students in that classroom, and that's in the form of teacher evaluations. One of the things that Dr. Go did point out was that it still really is across the country in its infancy. There's not one particular jurisdiction or state that you can say, well, that's the model that you should follow. They've been doing it right for a long time, and let's all be like that state or that jurisdiction. There's a lot of states right now, like Hawaii, that's really trying to take this issue up and really start to move forward with it.
Well, as soon as you say teacher evaluation, I mean, the teachers get like, well, how are you going to do that? Is it just grades, or, I mean, is it testing scores, which are controversial in themselves? And is it, how are you going to say the teacher's achieving and working with students well? So I know that's definitely another hot topic where people get very excited about as soon as you say evaluation. So that's something that you're going to be starting to work on, because we have to evaluate the teachers somehow, right?
Right. I think less so from the legislative standpoint, but I know that it would be a product of negotiations and the department sitting down with the unions. But teacher evaluations is even one of the components of our Race to the Top application. And what Dr. Go did mention is, while some states may adopt a very strict model that's reliant on test scores, you can look at multiple measures, and kind of she was advocating you should look at multiple measures in terms of what makes a highly effective teachers. Test scores might be one of them, but do you also have good evaluators coming in and observing a teacher in a classroom setting and determining they do in fact reach the student, they engage the student, whether or not the test scores reflect significant gains. Are they making progress based on the way that they teach? Are they effective as teachers? And so she was mentioning that there's multiple ways that we can look at, and some of the states are looking at it from a multiple measure standpoint in terms of how you do teacher evaluations, but also again recognizing that there is no holy grail in terms of what is that one standard that's out there. I appreciated when I asked her the question about what we do right, that she's going to go and brag to other states about, is that she did say that it was our ability to sit at the table together and want to work as a group. And she witnessed that on the Big Island when she went to talk with some of the zone areas and some of the zone schools about what they're doing and what they could be doing. And she really saw this willingness amongst all the stakeholders to really come together and work together. And she said, you don't necessarily see that in other states or jurisdictions, but Hawaii really embraces that model and that concept. And my hope is, even during these challenging times when we find ourselves at a bit of at odds with each other, that we're going to be able to overcome that and in the end just do what's right for the kids.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because one of the issues that I noticed, because we got a statement, actually I had a writer there covering the story, and they said the exact quote about how she said it's about everybody coming together and working together. And right as I was editing that, I got a statement from the governor's office, and that was a joint statement from the Department of Education, the governor's office, and I can't remember who the other one was, but or the Board of Education. Yeah. Basically saying, we're doing our best in the union conflict right now. So, can you give a little background on that? I know you're in a certain situation where you're in the state senate, and that's not a party necessarily involved.
Right.
But just as an outside observer into this union negotiations on teacher contracts, right?
Right.
Could you give an overview of what's going on and where we're at right now?
That can be a complicated answer, and I'm definitely not a labor attorney in that particular area.
No.
But I think for many of us, as we watch it, we're just hoping that this will be resolved soon.
So basically, it's the teachers want a certain contract, and the governor's trying to offer a cut and pay.
I think there's been multiple, from my understandings, because again, because we're so removed from the process, we basically get the information in our news. That's how we find out about it. And so, as is the process of collective bargaining, multiple drafts will go onto the tables. Thus, negotiations are ensuing with different aspects in each particular draft. And it appears that we've reached an impasse where there was no acceptance or willing to give in any particular area. And so now the question is a legal challenge as to whether or not the state could, in fact, impose its best and final offer on the teachers beginning with the school year, because again, the contract ceased to exist on July 1st, and you have to start with another one.
So the unions the teachers union doesn't have collective bargaining, right? It has the right to strike, is that right? Or the teachers can go out on strike if they want to?
There is that power, the ability to strike.
And we've seen that in the past.
And we have seen that in the past.
I remember when Governor Cayetano was governor, there was a big teacher strike during the school year.
Yes.
I think it was in the spring.
I think almost every decade we've seen one significant teacher strike, or every 10, 15 years or so you've seen some major strikes. I'm just hoping really that, again, at the end of the day, we can somehow quickly resolve this, because while this is a huge hurdle, and it is very personal to so many people, because you're talking about people's livelihoods and the ability for them to take care of their families, and the ability for the state to take care of its large family as well. I mean, we all have competing needs at times in this particular case. But really, I hope we can overcome this, because the challenges that we really have lie ahead of us. And there's a lot of opportunities, like I've said, for us to do some amazing things. But if the relationship is not there where we can sit at a table and we can talk and we will work together, it's going to be difficult for us to achieve those. So for myself, at least, selfishly, I'm hoping we can resolve this as soon as possible and we can just get back to work.
I'm sure a lot of parents feel that way.
Yes.
They don't want to have to figure out what they're going to do with their kids and
sure.
the school year and worry about, are they going to be able to go back? Because school is actually starting pretty soon for public school.
Next week, if I'm not mistaken. You know, I'm not quite at the I have to buy school supply rush yet with my 2 toddlers yet, but I know I see the school supplies aisles packed full at Long. So I believe it's next week it starts up, or if not, it's probably next week that it starts. And so there's a lot of, I think, anxiety and apprehension that a lot of parents are feeling, and no doubt teachers as well, because while we think that every teacher must know everything about what's going on, you know, when you have these negotiations, it's oftentimes a very small group of people that's in that room. I mean, you can't have the entire union in there negotiating at the same time, but I have no doubt that for many teachers, this is a very scary time for them as well. And I think we've got to make sure, whether it's from the union or what part, that there's good communication with those teachers as well, so they know what's going on. I can't even imagine starting a school year and trying to get my lesson plans in order and not knowing what's going to happen in my own personal life when it comes to my paychecks or any benefits or any costs that I'll be incurring. So again, the real hope is let's resolve this as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess the issue is there's the HGEA, which is the Hawaii Government Employee Association, which already settled its contract with the state. And it has a clause where it says if anything, I forget what the clause is called.
The most favored nation.
Most favored nation clause, right? It has an interesting name. So if any other union gets more than they did, then they get that same benefit. Is that right?
Right. I think the principle was that we'd all have shared pain and shared sacrifice. Right. But if somebody else has somewhat less than me, then why should I be giving more than the other? And I believe that's the principle. We come up with catchy names like Most Favored Nation, Evergreen.
Yeah. So it's unlikely that the state would be able to offer the teachers something that they haven't offered the HGEA, because that would mean they'd have to give it to all these employees, thousands and thousands and thousands, right? 35,000 or something like that.
Well, that would be the consequence, unintended or whatnot consequences if you do provide a better package to the teachers, that it could in fact trigger the Most Favored Nation clause for HGEA, and then the fiscal impact would be that much greater.
So when the state says this is our last and best final offer, they probably mean it, because it has a bigger impact.
You know, the state's in a tough position. You know, I don't envy anyone in that negotiation room, whether they're representing the teachers or the state.
So who is in the negotiation? You have the governor's office.
You have the governor's office, you have representation from the Board of Education and the Department of Education leadership team. So they're there as half of the management team, and then you have HST in the room as well. So it's, like I said, I don't envy any of their positions, because I think everyone must understand the gravity of the situation that we're dealing with as a state, and the kind of budget deficits that we're really dealing with. $1.3 billion this last session, compounded on billions prior to that, really start to make things difficult when you've cut away at so much, and then you've got to now cut some more. It does create many issues, and I think that's what the governor is thinking about in the back of his head as he's going into many of these negotiations. At the same time, it's difficult. You know, how do you try to make this a win-win for the teachers as well, who they have families and they have, you know, their own personal lives and challenges and struggles that they have to deal with. So again, I don't envy any of their situations, but I'm hoping for a quick resolution to this.
So one of the big issues last year and the year before were furloughs, and that got parents really upset.
Yes.
And it probably did not help Lieutenant Governor Iona's election challenge. And it seems like Governor Abercrombie really pushed the public education, and that's, you know, really boosted him to the top. And in terms of winning, and so parents are just fed up, fed up with whoever's fault it is, you know. And it's hard to blame the Board of Education when you don't know anyone's name, and you know you don't know Department of Education, and so all these factors. But so do we still have furloughs? Are they done with in terms of the public school?
Right. I've been hearing lately that people are saying we do have furlough days, which I think they're viewing as the professional days that the teachers in the past, had been using for various planning days or whatnot, which the students are not in school. But again, and I'll double check on my facts as well, we did make sure that there would be 180 instructional days in the classroom this last legislative session. And to ensure that, we did put in the $120 million over the life of the biennium in general funds to make sure that we had those instructional days paid for, essentially.
So the kids are in school, but maybe some of the furlough days are still on the teacher days.
What might have been considered planning days,
Okay.
In the past where students weren't in there. I think the issue now, if I'm not mistaken, and again, it's become very cloudy and confusing, it may be the case that now those planning days are unpaid days for the teachers, so they're viewed as furlough days. But I can tell you that from a legislative perspective, getting that 180-day mark was very important, which is why we did allocate out the $60 million each year from general funds into the DOE's budget to get them to 180. That was really important for us.
I remember that was a big controversy because you took the Hurricane Relief Fund, right? And put it in the general fund.
And that Hurricane Relief Fund was actually for the prior. We're just dealing.
This is more.
This is more.
Okay.
And that's kind of where you can figure out the $60 million number, is because we did that for the last school year. We're talking about $120 million for the coming school year and the following school year for the biennium budget.
60 million
so
each.
60 million was taken from the Hurricane Relief Fund for that one school year, the last school year. The 120 million I'm talking about is for the next 2 school years in the biennium. So this is not from the Hurricane Relief Fund.
Okay, got
although that also was touched as well.
How big is the budget for the schools approximately?
Now that you
can't
mention
remember. Isn't it about $2 billion?
It's a large number,
Billion with
and
a
I
B.
should know this quite well
that's
because
okay.
I have the.
We'll get you on again because we're almost out of time. But if you 30 seconds, what is the next session coming? What do you think is going to happen next legislative session?
I will say in my defense, though, the DOE budget is about 1/3 of the entire state
yes,
budget.
I know. That's
so
why.
to give you that perspective, and I'm sorry,
No. It's about the whole budget is about 10 billion, so
right.
11
so
billion, somewhere in there.
It's a large number, and it has a number of things like personnel, special costs, and whatnot. But in terms of the next legislative session, we're going to really continue on, I believe, on this track of better accountability and hopefully better outcomes for our students. So we're going to look at things like charter school governance, bus contracts. We're going to take a better look at our statutes and shore that up, and just a whole lot of other things. I think that in the end, my hope is results in better student achievement. So I think we're going to have a very competitive, very good, solid package to propose next session.
We're going to have you back on because we're already out of time. Thank you so much. I wanted to do this show for a long time, so thank you for joining us today. Senator Jill Tokuda on education, and we'll have her back for part 2. Thank you so much.